speak, what my point of view is, comes straight away from being involved in the process of creating value when working with people. So I will come from that point of view. If I talk to, if you go through the biodata, you will see Professor Pradipta Banerjee, and that is a little bit of the first bit of confusion that we are not related at all. We have met, and it's very, very, very kind of strange to have two Bengalis with a similar sounding name on the dais at the same time, because Bengalis are not known for their, how can I say, industry. So, but we also discovered we come from the same college and there is a lot in common, and he was in the hostel right next to mine, so that is good news. So he spent a lot of time in the academic area. He's, of course, studied in a premier institution, then worked in India, worked outside of India, and I would imagine the area, starting with the area of civil engineering, he's got a host of accomplishments to his resume, which make him ideally suited to speak about the subject which we have for today. On my right, we have got Mrs. Pratibha Jolly, who has got, again, if you go through the biodata, I will not go through what is written there, but here is one person who possibly who is ideally suited to address one important aspect of the subject which we will talk about, which is how can we make it more accessible, how can we increase the reach, how can we make it more inclusive. She has got many accomplishments, but this aspect will pull out of what she has done so far. On the extreme right, Mr. Malik with Deloitte, again, almost 20 years of experience working with various major consulting firms and interacting very heavily with the industry. And he and his team are the architect behind the report which was released in the morning, the ASH report. I think a very nicely written and a very structured essay on what the state of the higher education in our country is. So he comes with an enormous amount of experience in this field, and we will very shortly request him to give us a simple synopsis of where does he think we stand in this area, and then we can throw some questions to the panel members here. And time permitting, what we will do is we will also throw it open to some of you. If you are interested, we can talk a little bit on this subject. So having said that, can I, Mr. Malik, request that you take us through, you have a short presentation. Okay, we have released this. Yeah, and we are doing only for you because you are very special. You have come after lunch, so we'll stand up and open this book which we are talking about.
Yes, so the actual report is there, and this is part of the 7 publications which is released. Yes, this session especially focuses on this report.
Yeah, so goes by. That should be easy. More. Thank you.
So as we see, India has one of the largest higher education systems in the world. It is the 3rd largest after USA and China, and higher education has witnessed significant growth in institution capacity over the last 5 years. As we can see from the table that we have, the number of colleges over the last 5 years have increased by 18%. So today we have around 27,000 colleges. Universities has also been on a growth path with over 700 universities today. There has been over a nearly doubling of number of teachers in the higher education system from around 7.7 lakhs in 2010 to around 14 lakhs right now, which is a compounded growth of around 22%. And of course, the number of students also have nearly doubled, which is from 115 lakhs to over 2 crores now, which is again a compounded rate of growth of around 21%. So, and also the capacity expansion that we are seeing in the higher education space is actually growing primarily through the private sector, universities and colleges that have been set up in the last couple of years. So taking on that, we see that now the 75% of the colleges in India are now private, and it accounts for nearly 64% of the enrolled students. The private universities which over the last couple of years have been coming up under the various State Private University Act that enables it, now amount to around 40% of all the universities in the country. And if we see the number, the states which have the highest number of private universities are Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu and UP, which accounts for nearly 1/3 of the private universities that we have. Then almost 70% of the private universities in India are the state private university, which means that they have been set up under state specific acts. Each state is allowed to pass a private university act, and these have come under that. And of that, Rajasthan has the highest number of them. Out of 18 major states, 5 yet do not have any state private universities. And if we see the distribution of the type of private universities, we have nearly 70% being the state private university, that is formed under a state university act. The other around 25% are deemed universities in the private sector. And there's a 12%, the balance around 4 or 5%, that is deemed universities which are state aided. Now we come to the gross enrollment ratio, which in higher education globally we are quite poor. Countries like China and others, Thailand, they are between 24 and 26%. We were stuck in 20% for quite some time, and now we are inching towards 23%. The government has a target of achieving 30% GER in higher education by 2020. Now Tamil Nadu again has, we have seen that they are doing well in the private university space, and also their GER and higher education is more than 40%. Now coming to the college density, that is the number of colleges that there are per lakh population, we see that Telangana leads is the leader with around 55 colleges per 1 lakh, and Bihar has the lowest at 6 colleges per lakh. And Uttar Pradesh, which was also one of the highest in the number of private universities, they too have a low college density of 22 per lakh, but also the GER is also increasing, and it's crossed the 20% mark. Now we come to the equity or inclusiveness in higher education. So on an overall basis, we see that the GER for males is 23.7%, that's nearly 24%. It's 3% higher than the females, which is 21.4%. So there is a gender parity of 0.9 when we see male to female. And among the states, Kerala has one of the highest gender parity index of 1.37. and Rajasthan has the lowest in the country. In terms of the social groups, we find that the social scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, they have a lower than the national average, with the scheduled caste being around 17% and scheduled tribes being 12%. Again, Kerala has the highest gender parity index for within the scheduled caste, which is at a high of 1.84, and for scheduled tribes at 1.26. So these are all data which have been culled out of the report we just released. Now we come to the quality and excellence in higher education, and as we see, these are as per the framework of the Rashtriya Uchatar Shiksha Abhijan. So the first one is that the government encourages all institutes of higher education to have an accreditation. So around 74% of colleges are already having the accreditation. And in terms of university, it's a bit low, with only a third of the universities having this accreditation. That is 266 out of the over 700 universities that we have. Now going by the share of regular mode of enrollment, there is a high difference between between the total enrollment and the regular mode of enrollment. In terms of certificate, it's 57%. For postgraduate diploma, it is 25%, and postgraduate programs, it is 32%. So as we go up in the higher education, we see that the mode of enrollment actually goes down. Then there is a wide variation is also seen in the pupil-teacher ratio, that is the PTR. Well, while Karnataka has a teacher for 1 for every 14, Kerala has 1 for every 16. While it is very high in states like Jharkhand, which is 1 teacher for every 55 students, followed by Bihar for 1 teacher for every 51 students. While under RUSA, the benchmark that we want to achieve is 1 teacher for every 15 students. And one of the issues that does face the higher education is the faculty shortage and inability of the state education system to attract and retain well qualified teachers. There are issues about the working conditions, the level of autonomies that is given to them, and in some cases, especially the state, there is the issue of the pay that they get. Now coming to employability in higher education, we see that if we look at all the enrollment data that we have for undergraduate courses, the majority, that's 41%, are opting for arts, humanities and social sciences. It is followed by engineering and technology, where it's 17%, and commerce 14%, and science is 13%. So essentially we see that arts, humanities, social science, engineering, technology, commerce and science accounts for the bulk of the students that come out of our education system. But also we have a report which is by the National Employability Report, which is on the graduates, which shows that again the lowest employability is exhibited by arts graduate. That is, though we are churning out many art graduates, if we look at how they are employed, in fact we see that most of the unemployed people are within this. And of course we just found, we saw that 68% of the graduates in undergraduate are in the general education. So they're not going into specialist educations like IT, medical, management, law, etc., which are the more professional courses. So this this is leading to a high skill shortage for which is required for the growth of the service economy in our country. Now if you look at budgetary allocation to the states, as we recently know, in the last budget we saw that that while the education still remains over the year, it has been 3% of our GDP is what gets allocated to education across the country. Last year, because of the 14th Finance Commission recommendations which got implemented, and the states got a large amount of funds devolved to them. So the overall the budget for education from the central budget, that got significantly reduced. So and of course the state's share of expenditure in higher education does increase, because education is really a state subject in our country. So the state share of education in higher education, in the expenditure of higher education, has increased from 262 crores, which was in financial year 14, to around over 1,000 crore, which is budgeted in this current financial year. So this is more to do on the devolution of funding, which is as per the RUSA. As we know that the certain states which are priority states in the country, like the northeastern states, Sikkim, J&K, Himachal, These states get for the RUSA funding which goes out, and RUSA funding over the 12th plan period is around 23,000 crores. So for these states, whatever project they take under RUSA, the contribution of central fund is 90% and state government has to give 10%. And for the others, it is 65% from central and 35% for states. So this is all to give you a kind of synopsis of the education system in India and how it's been funded. So now we'll go back to our panel discussion. Thank you.
How can we transition to a curriculum which is infinitely more flexible, which is more tailored to what the customer really needs, the student really needs? And within that, how can we really spark off the innovative juices which come out of this establishment?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Banerjee. I think, I'd like to address all of these issues in a slightly different manner to a certain aspect leading from what Mr. Malik talked about. And that is that, we talk about numbers. We're talking about gross enrollment ratio of 30%. We're not talking about where do we need that enrollment to be in. I think that's why, I think when you ask me to talk about curriculum, I'd like to say, first and foremost, I think we need to be very clear. We need to change the social dimension of degree. I think the factor, if you really look at it, this is something that has evolved over actually the last 60 odd years, where everybody wants to be their sons and daughters. In fact, I come from a very small town called Roorkee, okay, and it actually is supposed to be, there's something like 15 or 20 universities in that small town. And even the rickshawala, who has education till the 2nd or 3rd standard. The whole purpose is children have to be graduates. And what also happens is the entire system actually feeds on that graduation, and that's why if you look at it, 41% is in the arts. Okay. What we are actually missing is, if you look at curriculum wise, we need to actually look back, and this is the reason why I think industry academia interaction is that important, because we need to understand where is it that we need. See, today we are talking about skill. Again, the skill ministry is separate from the HRD ministry, which actually looks at education, which is looking at 30% gross enrollment ratio. Are we going to actually skill our people, or are we going to actually just churn out more useless graduates? I think these are the decisions that are fundamental to this. And you talked about curriculum. I think we need to really look at Germany, okay, and if you look at the system of Germany, it has the entire system. It has polytechnics, which is actually about skills, and the skills would be wherever we require, the industry requires skills. So this is actually what we call as the classical polytechnic. Then you have the graduates. Very few would actually be graduates, and the graduates would actually be geared towards something that you require. One level you require at the doers, then you require at one level which is the managers, and then a third level which is the leaders. So I think we need to clearly identify what are the areas we need the people and look at it from that perspective. Okay, so now curriculum. Now I'll specifically, at once having said this, that we require this, it's very important that curriculum not be prescriptive. Today in India, we actually have very, very prescriptive curricula. Of course, it's besides the point that not everybody follows that prescriptive curriculum. And again, that curriculum development is also divorced from what is needed. See, I think curricula needs to evolve over a period of time as our needs of the industry evolves over time. Okay, and that's why that flexibility, and in fact I think the IITs are the classical kind of hotbed of flexibility of curriculum, where almost every 5 years we go through the entire exercise of talking to industry, talking to stakeholders, talking to faculty, talking to students, because students also have aspirations, and changing our entire curriculum and make it in such a way that let the students, with a little bit of counseling, decide what is best for them. I think that is where the flexibility, this flexibility requires a dialogue between industry and academia. I think it's very, very important. I think that is fundamentally one thing. Of course, industry also needs to be very clear in its 5 to 10 year to 15 year to 20 year projection, because one of the issues that happens is industry talks about what they need today, and what you give them is 3 to 4 years down the road. Now the industry, by the time we catch up with them, they moved the goalpost. So I think what we also need is actually looking at what the industry feels is the future, and then discuss how do we train the people around that. I think that's where the flexibility of the curriculum comes in, and one should be able to create, and it's very important that the curriculum should be such that while you gain knowledge in depth in a particular area, you also get the breadth of knowledge. I think that's very, very important. Now, innovation, again, see, here, we talk about, we've talked about universities of innovation, okay, innovation clusters. Okay. Innovation is part of, you cannot, you cannot say that, okay, I'll innovate this, and someone comes and says, okay, I'll make something to do with this. You see, that is an idea. Does that idea actually stand merit in terms of the industry picking that? See, innovation again cannot be divorced from the needs of the industry. Now that's the reason why again I again and again come back to the fundamental thing, and which is why I think these kind of meetings are very, very important, because industry also, I've got a lot of people, Startup India, we're talking about Startup India. Okay, very good, startups. But for startups to make economic sense, the startups have to satisfy a specific need. It may be the need is not even understood today, but the need should be there in the future.
Sure.
Okay, so I think so innovation by itself, and how do we get innovation? Innovation does not come divorced from the curriculum. Why? Because in the curriculum itself, you need to train the students, train everybody into the idea of, okay, go out there, do something. So the curriculum should also have that concept of let the students just be doing something on their own. How do we structure that innovation? For example, I'll give you an example of what we do. In IIT Roorkee, what we've done is we've sent our students out into some villages. Find out what their problems are. Talk to the villagers and find out what their aspirations are. Find out their problems and their aspirations. Come back. Start thinking about how you're going to solve those. Okay, I think that's where, when they see the real world, they come back and they start thinking about that. And it's not individual. Innovation is never individual. Innovation is all about, maybe 10, 15 people, groups, talking to each other. Okay, how do we solve this problem? So I think that's how the innovation aspect comes in, and give them that opportunity. And also another thing, very, very important, opportunity and the facilities. See, innovation cannot happen like, I think, today I just think, okay, maybe I'll change this keyboard. Okay, I should have the facilities to create the next keyboard. Just thinking is not good enough. So I think, so we need the facilities that go with the innovation paradigm. Okay, and I'm sure that if there is this linkage between industry and academia in the innovation, part. I'm sure that, India will soon, very soon, because I have seen our students. I interact with our students. They are brimming with ideas. It's just that we do not have that
Mentorship.
that channeling of their ideas into actually becoming something that is usable and marketable. Marketable, I don't mean only marketing to the, please understand that even doing something for the villages, which is a societal innovation,
Yeah.
also is a very important part.
Absolutely. Thank you. I was just thinking through, and I agree with, if I summarize, you make, I think, 6 important points. One is starting with our obsession with the need to get the label of
Graduate.
educated, I've graduated. Second, you talk about is a huge gap in the area of what we teach and what the skills which we give are actually not relevant from a employability point of view. The third point which you make is around not having a effective forum in which we are able to carve out what the future needs are going to be. Fourth thing you talk about is there is a whole new dimension which is missing today, which is about connecting with the country, finding out what the future needs are, sending the students to the villages and bringing them back. So that framework could be made bigger. And the last thing you talk about, which I think has got to do with a little bit of funding and issues like that, the quality of infrastructure to allow people to realize their dreams. So there's 6 points which you make. Good. So we'll come back to some of this. So we talked about supply and demand. We talked about some elements of the curriculum, how we can possibly begin to think about reshaping them. Now let me get back to the other thing, ma'am, to you. You have done an enormous amount of work which basically will enable increase in reach, and I think that's what I learned from the short description which I had. Maybe you've done something else which you can build on. If we were to leapfrog into creating those 40 million spaces, if I take a very oft-quoted, cliched analogy of mobile telephones and landlines, we possibly can leapfrog to the next generation, which we connect through IT, connect through many other means which we don't see today, to create those 40 million places. Because what we've done in the past is unlikely to succeed in the next 60 months if we were to take that kind of compressed time frame. So your thoughts on the reach dimension?
Thank you. I think it's an incredible session because these are exciting times, and these are exciting times for the very young students who are very aspirational. And I thank you for this exceedingly interesting data, which I have browsed through in some detail in some cases. I also would like to say I agree entirely with Professor Banerjee on this, that we need to look at the numbers, but we also need to talk about the quality. And anecdotes are very important in understanding the quality of both the problem and wherein the solutions lie. Well, I come from liberal arts and basic science college, also very, very strong on basic sciences, and we have been experimenting a great deal. And I think we also chronicle the history of education in independent India for women. And there are lessons that can be extrapolated. So some of the changes that one is now seeing is in the demographic profile. And as a central university, we're based at Delhi University, students from across the country aspire to get into some of the quality education centers. And they're doing so entirely on their own merit. It's very important as we go along to be able to see, when we talk of excess, we talk of excellence and expansion. How can we, these are divergent concepts. How can we remain true to each of these in a mission mode and allow those who are really good and aspiring to get to these institutions? Obviously, as you have already said, there's an issue of demand and supply, and not just in the short run, but also in the long run. At any point, how do you get admitted to any of these centers of higher learning is going to be very important. Somehow we have not looked, when we are defining higher education policy, at the collateral changes that need to be brought in. We're very frequently talking about the structure or the framework of education. It doesn't really matter whether you have annual or semester. It really doesn't matter, if you're going to have CBC, a choice-based credit system or some other system. The delivery is important. what the outcomes is going to be extremely important, and who are the players in this. So obviously there's a faculty, there's a shortage, there is problem of capacity. There are the students who are sometimes there for the right reasons, sometimes they should, perhaps if they had a better understanding of career paths, they could have been in other places like maybe the community colleges or where the jobs are, and those who are academically accelerated need to have those opportunities which are unadulterated and they are not diluted by numbers, so that they can in-depth and prime destination. It's quite interesting that there is so much of awareness now. So you can have a young child come up and say, this is my dream place. I have been wanting to come here and I've worked hard. And if you look at the demographic profile, these institutions at one point might have been elite because they attracted those who were economically very strong. But today that elitism really means that there is merit. Students have got into a very difficult place to be in. I mean, our admission criteria is almost 100 on 100. And, and students are making it from variety of state boards. And so they are coming across, and many of them are from far-flung places. They're first-generation learners. They come from economically backward or marginalized families. So let me say that the demographic profile of an institute such as mine, which is amongst the top institutions of the country, today has about 20% from east of, let's say, Bihar. Bihar, Jharkhand, Assam, West Bengal, Northeast, the Seven Sisters, and so on. And then you get another 20% that could be from Haryana and UP. And Rajasthan, which your report says has been, is to get that. The important statistic is that 50% students are then trying to get access to this education by not just making their way to the best institutions, but also finding, carving out a comfortable, living in the city, getting accustomed to it, and so on and so forth. Many of them are also taking tuitions and so on. Many of the addresses could very well be, a Jugi number this, a parental income of about, say, 200, or let's say about 10% students being under 70,000 per year. So the task then becomes of finding bursaries, finding safe accommodation, and also trying to tune in a life with its environment. What are the job opportunities after you have traveled this, you have undertaken this arduous journey and you have come? Then the question of quality. Are we able to not just mold their lives, give them the best of opportunities, give them confidence, give them a voice, and overlay a new identity, whatever the socio-economic cultural identity may be. We want that to be strengthened, but at the same time sensitively overlay a new identity that is one which is of educated, urban thinking, innovative, creative adult who will follow passions and dreams to carve, to maybe give back to society in a very big way. So what we need to do is bridge very quickly this supply-demand chain so that there are centers of equal excellence all over and not so much of energy goes in traveling across. And obviously, I agree entirely that there's too much emphasis on degrees, which tend to have they're almost monochromatic. And you need to have much more character built into these degrees. They have to be in accordance not just with the opportunities, but also with the potential of the individual. So flexibility in terms of, it is easier said than done globally that you find out what is it that the student want and deliver it, because we don't have faculty that is tuned to the needs of education in changing times. Let me say, even blending ICT in education used to be a challenge, and when some of us in early days were talking about it, lugging our own equipment, everyone would say at the end of it, well, all this is very good, but it's too expensive, how do we have it, it's not accessible. Today, because that generation sees that they can communicate with their families, with their children, and so on Facebook and with email and on WhatsApp, that part of the debate is settled. Everyone knows that, you know, this is empowering, that the mobile or the tablet and so on is accessible and has a great deal of potential of changing things. So first thing that is important in a country where I don't think we can create that many 40,000 or 50,000 educational institutions is to redefine education itself. And it's not redefining, it's understanding that no one ever was able to teach anybody anything. And you have to be a self-learner. And this education can happen in your own environment. Innovation can happen in your own environment. What you have to do is community-based practice where we do not really undersell, or we do not fail to recognize the smartness or the native talent of our own people across the country. So there is something to be said about what is a non-formal way of learning, what is an informal way of learning, what is apprenticeship, what is cognitive apprenticeship, what is learning on the job. And I think we are failing ourselves when we say, oh, it's only when I do a workshop for adult teaching or adult learners, or when I do a skill building workshop, that's when learning takes place. Actually, it just doesn't take place within those 3 days or 1 week or so on and so forth. It's a lifelong process. We need to go back to the apprenticeship models, and industry can play a very big role. Artisans can play a very big role, and we have to devolve not just funding, but we also have to devolve the whole idea that communities can also teach, and very few people need finally to come up, it's a pyramid, come up for formal education. And that's where I think when we talk of numbers, we need to differentiate and with that be able to create learning experiences. This also links up with innovation. We have found that small science or small innovations or small case studies, small projects, project-based learning, peer-to-peer learning, collaborative learning, or reversing the role where the teacher also learns along with the collaborative team has worked very, very well for us. The idea is that when we speak of innovation or innovative bent of thinking, we don't really mean it has to be earth-shaking, but it is a way of thinking and a way of training that becomes extremely important. And at Delhi University, and I think I built a career of working just with undergrads, because I always say, don't have faith in the formal classroom. And it's just ironic that I have to head a formal institution. But the best learning takes place when we break these boundaries. And we work also with communities, with the community engagement in real world, we can deliver. So there are no simple answers on how we can expand and expand with quality, unless we also understand that technology will also take time. And it is only a prepared mind and a fertile territory where any innovation can deliver. So we really have to get to leverage the fact that India is today aspiring. People are mobile. The mobility is the key. And parents also are willing to lay a whole lot of emphasis on education. It's been very surprising, but at every forum I find, and as I said, our population, student population, is the demographic profile of the country. And even from the most forward-looking families, the tradition boundness is always evident. But it's very remarkable that all students will come up and say, and women students these are, that I have to first build a career. My parents are going to kill me almost. They're not going to like it if I were to think of marriage first and not build a successful career. So they have these aspirations, and these are the ones that need to be leveraged. In 3 years with hand-holding, they really evolve. They have a new identity. They are reaching on, they on their own are finding opportunities and scholarships, making it to Ivy League institutions, finding their way to the best institutions globally. And in all this, there's a process that's important, and that is of opportunity. Giving them an opportunity to meet with the very best, be it scientists or other scholars, be it, and so I think we need to build a bridge. We need to build a bridge, one side to the schools, do the capacity building of the teachers in schools, which we do. On the other hand, network with research institutions, the very best experts and global resource persons and experts bring these opportunities wherever they are. At the same time, we also do host the School of Open Learning classes, which is a very different framework. And that's when you realize just because somebody did not make it to a formal high cutoff institution doesn't make that person less intelligent. It's just that they will cater to a different sector, because traditionally we lay too much emphasis on degrees. But if you were to look at the biographies of many people, you know, many would be college dropouts who would have done rather well. And so these are the students who perhaps have greater clarity on where they're headed. And this is the group that industry and workforce at one stage of a pyramid needs to really work on. Because skill building is not for everybody. If I'm on, let's say, if we are getting students on the top of the pyramid, then it doesn't make sense that we should, because one size doesn't fit all, put them through a skill training on, let's say, health sector or on insurance sector or even on media and communication or computer learning, because they just don't want it. They can do it all far better. What we need to do is we need to identify the students who want to do this. For this set of students, a different entrepreneurial skill is needed, because these are the ones who will actually start up and make India stand up too. So that differentiation is important. So I think, just to summarize, I feel at some point we should talk of gender as well on this, and that's important. And we should also look at how we need to think beyond the idea of a brick and concrete institution, because it's going to take too long to do that. We need to respect the native talent and the capacity of, let's say, cognitive apprenticeship at various levels to deliver. And best institutions, even where they're brick and mortar, those who are successful had opportunity to have, in the typical Gurukul Shishya Parampara, which the grad school replicates ever so well, learn from seniors, learn from peers, and learn from mentors across, let's say, in a conversation, never in the chalk and talk mode.
Thank you. I think that was comprehensive. My mind was going through the summary which you were making. If I just take again 4 or 5 things which come to my mind, I think what you said, look, regardless of the number, 40 million or there, take concrete steps to address the supply and demand gap, the way you think. But in the meantime, support the centers of excellence which are coming up. Delhi, you take Delhi as an example, I'm sure. There are more which we can talk about. But don't look at just the educational part of it, look at the support structure, like cheap housing, like and stuff like that, hostels and so on, to make that come alive. And that is actually completely consistent, because if you read some other set of demographics, 50 top centers in this country are going to drive the economic prosperity for the next few years, and that is consistent with what you say. The second thing which you said is, look, don't worry, India is connected, India is aspiration. The mobile revolution is for all of us to see. The technology may take some time, so the basic desire to go up in life, call it the graduate culture, it's there. So that's a huge driving force. But what you need, the third point, is a segmented approach to things. Think about ways how you can segment one shoe doesn't fit all approach. And in the meantime, the fourth point, I think very important one, which we don't talk about enough, is build networks with schools, with create opportunities, with alumni. You didn't mention alumni, but I think it's a very strong network. And the last, which probably is the most difficult one, begin to take some steps to redefine the whole notion of education. It doesn't have to be the way we have seen it in the last 60 years. You talked about cognitive skills, you talked about non-formal education, you talked about the whole range, and I do not know how really that will get addressed, but that's the important part of not letting formal training get in the way of education. So these are the 5 things which I took away from what you said. Thank you for that. Now, changing roles slightly and coming to you, Mr. Malik, you have an enormous experience of almost 2 decades working in this subject with working with industry. And if I were to pick up 2 specific things with you, one is if the 3 stakeholders are, as we said, the industry, the government bodies, and the educational institutions. I think we heard 2 very strong arguments from the educational institution point of view. From an industry perspective, what can What are the 2 or 3 concrete things we can do? And more importantly, specifically because this Rashtriya, this RUSA is going to be a game changer if executed well, and if it's the 2013 intent, if executed well. So what could be the 3 or 4 things which we can keep on looking at to see, yes, it is making progress, or yes, it is not making progress, we need to do some course correction. So these 2 aspects you can pick up.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing on what does the industry look from the education system, it is the education system which actually forges the young minds who will ultimately be employed in industry, whether it's manufacturing or services. Now if you look at the way the world is changing, as Professor Banerjee rightly pointed out, that by the time the course curriculum, even if it's made with industry support, by the time the students graduate, the goalposts shift, and this we can see happening in our current situation also, like the leapfrog, as Mr. Banerjee pointed out, of the mobile phone. Now the mobile phone became the smartphone, and it is possibly having the same computing power that supercomputer used to have, which were then exclusively run by government maybe 20-30 years ago. And with computing power being made available at extremely cheap rates, and with the communication network now supporting 3G, 4G, that is essentially the speed at which data can be accessed, the entire business model is changing. What we see today is a disruptive change. Today, if you see what Flipkart or Snapdeal, these kind of e-commerce portal, which started off with Amazon, which if you remember, it used to be a book selling company which suddenly became an e-commerce marketplace. Now what Flipkart and Snapdeal have essentially done is, using this computing power, they have actually made more stores. Like if you have a brick and mortar store like Big Bazaar or a West Side, they can only be in that many number of properties in a city. But by bringing it on an e-commerce platform, that entire business model is bought into tier 2, 3 cities, making it more accessible to many other people who had the aspiration and who have maybe had to make a quarterly or yearly trip to the city to enjoy these type of stores and get the products that they want. But along with that, an entire ecosystem has developed. If you see what e-commerce has done, it has changed the way logistics operates today. And with the change that has come, you will see that the employment is also shifting significantly, as in the delivery boys that are coming in. How do they connect? How do you ensure that most of these are cash on delivery, so they have to handle large amounts of money. So there is a lot of training that needs to go in, what type of software that is needed to track this logistics. So for that also, the entire there is an entire innovation which is happening on how to make the payment gateways. How do you get paid? How do you track a good that goes from one to another? Also, if you see the Make in India, we want manufacturing to be at least 25% of our GDP. But then Make in India, the way we are used to factories coming up and manufacturing, if you see integrated steel plants, those are gone. It will now be global production network. In fact, the entire manufacturing process will change, that if India today is the market, components will come from various parts of the globe, wherever it's logistically it is cost effective. And here essentially the requirement in this particular country or the market is, you manufacture what we are the best in at a scale, and import the rest. So the import will happen, components will come from countries which are the best in producing that kind of component. So even if we see what manufacturing industry wants today, that is also shifting. And also if we see what is happening in Europe, America today with 3D printing, that is additive manufacturing taking place. So there again there is another shift. So all of this requires human resources to be trained into these aspects, for knowledge to go to our future employees while they are students, that they need to means these are the new areas which are coming up, and these are opportunities that they have not only in India but also globally, because even if we look at our demographic profile, it is by 2020 the average age in India will be around 29 against 40 in US, 47, 46, 47 in Europe and Japan. So when the skill mission was launched by Prime Minister, he actually said the objective there was to make India the talent capital of the world. Now if you have to take all this into account, then it becomes very important that our education institutions, especially the higher education institute, they also need to be geared up to offer these kind of courses, curriculums that are required. And this is where the industry connect comes, that what industry wants today, that also needs to be effectively communicated to the various our universities, our colleges. They also need to know, they have to be brought on board so that they can also, whatever partnerships are required, that if this kind of course curriculum is not there in the country, they need to have a collaboration or a partnership with a particular institution that has this. Also our research capability has to improve. Here we are only, in terms of science and engineering doctorates, I think we are only coming up with only 4,000 people. But if you see this, if we have these scientific discoveries and innovations to happen in our country, then we need to offer, need to have many PhDs or researchers in our university and higher education ecosystem, for which we have to give them the facilities. So this is where the industry and the university or higher education connect comes. And now if you and this has been happening in the US, the Stanfords, the MITs for many years. In fact, they have an ecosystem where the research, all these ideas actually generate from the university rather than it coming from the industry. And if you see what Apple didn't do much of invention or innovation. What it did was it used to buy up these young startups which happened along these universities and bought over their patents. The patents were with the universities or with the students from the university. These companies were just taken into Apple, and that is how Apple got their these beautiful products which has so much innovation in them, right on time, and as and when the market was mature enough to take it. So this is the ecosystem that we need to look at also, is that these ideas must occur also when our students are in our colleges and universities, and for that ecosystem is required, as was discussed here, that you have to give them a proper thinking environment. You have to send them out, like Professor Banerjee said, send them out to the organization, especially like ours, where it is client facing. A lot of communication is given a lot of importance. That has to be verbal communication, written communication, because that's how the service effectively gets delivered. So other is under RUSA also, they're looking the other aspects are incubation centers, so that startups can be facilitated within the ecosystem. Then quality of faculty, as pointed out, that teacher training is required, but it should not be only through one or two workshops a year. It has to be a continuous process. They need to be given regular course materials. It could be through e-learning courses that are now available. So even the way that the delivery of education is going, that is also changing. You have the massive open online courses where even course material of Harvard, universities like Harvard are made available, and a person can complete these courses online and can get a certification from there. So these type of these type of new learning channels are also bringing education to people who need not go to a brick and mortar education institute, but also get the same knowledge and through other cost-effective channels without having to travel outside their home. The other point I like to make is there are various programs, like there is one with the UK government, like which is UK India Education Research Initiative. which has all these programs inbuilt where, so there could be faculty exchange program. The faculty can go to any UK college, learn the softer skills, leadership skills, and they come back and again they impart that on a train the trainer mode. There can be partnerships between two institutions are also part of this, and also student exchange programs are there. So all of this is effectively the framework of RUSA. Now RUSA is the money is available to state institutions, which gives a proposal to the center, to the RUSA, the body which governs RUSA, and if they see that that the proposal is realistic and all, then the money gets transferred, and there is a reporting and a monitoring mechanism by which on various indicators through which this is tracked.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Malik, that on the two issues I was just trying to. So basically, for the industry role in getting the part of that 40 million jobs, or or upgrading the skills or the new skills, if I hear you right, what you're saying is there is almost a business case for education, because people who don't do this, they will not survive. Essentially, that's what you use the example of logistics and e-commerce and stuff like that. And I do not know how much we talk about business case for education when we talk about. That's an interesting news. But and your premise is companies which do this well, they anyways would. And CIA therefore is an important role it has to make sure this always stays in focus. And competition, if I remember Mr. Naushad saying, competition is probably one of the best yardsticks we can keep in mind. So the business case for education. And RUSA, yes, it's a very comprehensive piece of policy work, bringing in quality assurance and accountability in a manner, and you expect that to happen. I want to pick up one thing before we still have about 14 minutes to go. You did mention, and that's been going in my mind, non-formal education. There is apprenticeship, there is ownership. And if I invite your views on, is there a way of creatively looking at this? Because if you go back in time, India has got many strengths, and the genesis of the higher education infrastructure as we see it now essentially is, how can I say, post-independence
Yes,
at
correct.
the time. So the objectives were very different at that stage. So do you see any creative way of looking at this opportunity?
Yeah, thank you. But I just wanted to take up something that Dr. Jolly said and something that Dr. Malik said, and I just want to take up on that. I just want to remind all of you of an ad, which comes fairly often, which strikes me very much, which is IDEA. About how a person couldn't complete the education and then completes the education through IDEA network, IIN, So I think, to a certain extent, one of the issues of community engagement and non-formal education is the recognition aspect. The aspect is, see, ultimately there's two parts of education. One is education for education's sake. Because what happens is when the next generation will know more. So I think there's this aspect of the IIN where, a mother, learns biology because she couldn't do it because she had to, take. I think, that's education for education's sake. I think very good, because what also happens is the next generation will gain from that education. Now, the aspect of what I'd like to go is actually take up on MOOC, but MOOC, the way it is done today, which is through platforms like edX and Coursera and even our own NPTEL that we had, the issue is the following, that they're very static, and they're not very interactive, and therefore one of the things that came out of a Coursera this thing was that only 5% actually complete the course. Most people ever cover up the faculty shortage in 7 years, because the creation of faculty takes long enough that you're not going to do it. So we need to use technology to leapfrog and also develop this certification process, and here's where this is important. Certification process has to be through some formal process. I mean, let me just say, put it that way. It could be, but there's one aspect is the knowledge gained through these MOOCs. Now, the next part of it is application. And that's where I feel that, again, I want to keep going back to the fundamental aspect, that if the industry does not interact with the citizen and, let's say, the broad-based academic institutions, all of what we are talking is not going to be successful. And that's the reason what happens is, part of the training aspect needs to be taken up by industry. Now, how do we make it a winning proposition for the industry? The very important part of it is how industry needs particular people. Okay, use them as interns, apprentices, I mean, whatever you may call it. Okay, as the apprenticeship is done in the industry. Okay, and the industry also gains from the apprentice actually doing something which may add value to what the industry is generating.
And there are models on this.
Yes. So I think this would be a model where if we want to leapfrog this 40 million in 7 years, the only way is technology coupled with industry, academia, participation in both the certification and acceptance of the knowledge. Please understand that whatever informal way you have, if it's not accepted by the people, then it's again just knowledge for knowledge's sake and not really useful. By the way, let me also claim this. Today we focus too much on output of the knowledge. Sometimes knowledge for knowledge's sake is also a good idea. The reason why I'm saying is, in our, for example, in technical education, we create very good engineers. They're terrible human beings. Okay, so to a certain extent, that ability to look at languages, to look at other aspects which broaden the mind, is a very important part of education and being useful in society.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for that. And you probably also, I'm sure, knowingly touched on another dimension of, and whether it is 300 million or 500 million, it's a moot point. But the fact is, the economic miracle will not take place unless you also have a large number of blue-collared employees who are suitably skilled, and the apprenticeship model actually fits in remarkably well there, and there are established models which work. It's coming up to almost 90 minutes, and I mean, we can go on for a while as well, because one of the key things which we have not spent enough time on is some top-line thoughts on how to close the supply and demand gap, and we said we'll come back to this. But given, and I know it's a subject which will not, some ideas have been talked about, but I think that's a subject in its own right which needs to be addressed. So if I just reflect on the last 90 minutes, we have talked about the supply and demand gap, we have talked about the quality of teaching and learning, we have talked about constraints on our curriculum, innovation and the likes, and we've talked about access and how can we really leapfrog into making sure, and some thoughts each of the panel members have given. Before we close this discussion, I just want to throw it open. I know we don't have a time for discussion, but any observation, anything which any one of you may have, it will be a pleasure to just take on. Yeah, please. I don't know if there's a possibility of giving a mic there, or maybe you can speak. There are not many of us. Yeah.
I am Professor Susharma from NIT Warangal.
Yeah.
Just I would like to add up to some of the points which Padita Banerjee has added with regard to innovation curriculum.
Yeah.
Because curriculum is something where as other panelists have mentioned, it is essentially a process. Innovation is not a termination, it is a process by which the students must be inculcated at a time while he is undergoing through the studies. In that process, if the students are made, as other professor has mentioned, the students are made to visit some of the society around and look at the problems around, and then without any constraints think about the possible solutions. That's where actually their innovation process can start. So in fact, to that extent, in NIT Warangal, I'm happy to say that we introduced what is known as engineering projects in community surveys as part of the media curriculum. So where the students will be encouraged, it is not compulsory for all, it is for select students who are motivated to work out, such as students will be guided for looking at some problems around. But what the problem what we're finding it is fine-tuning fact, if that can, if this kind of a model, if it is can be scaled up, and presently what we are looking forward is a suitable mentorship, because let's say assume that one of the students we have worked out with a public complaint and grievances system students have involved with, and then that was made as a proposal to the government of India under Smart City project. It is included. But if at all some mentorship that comes from relevant industries and nearby, probably that can be converted and refine it, and then can be used.
No, I think it's a good point. It's a very good point. And I don't want to take up time, naming individual companies, but there are many companies, large companies, very committed companies, which work in the area, in the communities where they have their establishments. And we just need to connect. But thank you for that comment, sir. Anything else? Which? Yes, please.
To draw upon on India's comment that like Apple example you gave, that it just went out and bought those companies. So the point, and I think your comments, collective comments, is that engaging which industry or who are the players which we engage at the university in developing the content is also, I think, very important, because some of the current industry solutions or their thoughts may not be relevant because industry itself is transforming at a rapid stage, that today's industry, they don't know what future needs are. So I think one approach could be that instead of focused on just education or just skills, maybe the capabilities creation, where the students are able to create something like Apple example, so that if students are taught to create something, capabilities, then perhaps it might be easier to get industry collaboration. So any thoughts on what kind of industry would you like to invite, the startup types or the well-established ones in the universities?
If I can just respond on, unless you want to take it.
No, I'll just one answer. It shouldn't be. It should be the entire spectrum.
Yeah.
I think that stands to reason. See, it's horses for courses, right? I think you have to figure out where. See, you also have to say, you can't tell the student, please create for this industry. You cannot do that. Because again, someone pointed out, maybe that student is not good enough to do that. He may be doing something else. So I think that is very important. But the entire spectrum is a very good idea.
Yeah. Look, fundamentally, just without taking up too much of time, it will come down to an economic case, a business case, because at the end of the day, for anything to be sustainable, resources have to come in from somewhere. And there's massive grants, which 23,000 crores for RUSA, which will come. It will be coming from somewhere. And therefore, accountability for that economic value which we need to add can never be. This morning I found that press statement interesting, Bill Gates saying that, look, of course we must go green, but it cannot be at the cost of growth. And that's a very different shift, which you begin to say, unless the activity is sustainable on a longer term basis, and pure intent will not make it sustainable. So there has to be a business case for that. Mr. Tharan, you were saying something. You raised your hand a little while back, because we were almost willing to invite you here to be a part of the panel.
Deepak Phatak, a teacher at IIT Bombay. While the industry very rightly says that they don't find people who are employable, what exactly industry has been doing in terms of proactively contributing to the educational process? It appears to me that industry always reacts. For example, we are talking about universities inviting industry. I do not know many instances where the industry CEOs ram down into the director's office and say, look buddy, you listen to me because there's something wrong. So why is it that the industry does not think that education is as much their responsibility? Primarily, it is the education which is the feeding line of all the raw material to the industry.
Completely agree with you, sir. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's in enlightened self-interest that the industry must recognize this. And let me take just one example, which is we can give it any name which you like. We call it loosely open innovation. And for the last almost 5 to 7 years, we have got formal MOUs. the transition would be almost boundaryless. So that's my own, and I think we'll see it in our own lifetime. The changes which we have seen in the last 10 years, we'll probably see in the next 10 months, because it's really accelerating. So it's coming up to almost 4 o'clock. I just want to thank you for your patience. I think I talked about, of course.
I just had another point, if I may.
Of course, sure.
Yeah,
All right.
Sure. I think most of the speakers, all the four of you spoke very, to the point. As to it, one is the education, that's the student itself. The mindset of the student is one, because we still, you're talking about rural schools and colleges, which they still mug up things. So we're still in that generation, and for us to change in the next 4 years, I think what we couldn't change in the last 60 years is a very important aspect one has to learn. And the biggest fact is, if you really compare ourselves to the US education, where the student actually, when I'm talking about higher education, the student pays for his education. So he's much more committed than, in India the father pays for the education, or a mother pays, or the family. So I think the commitment is what really needs to be done. And second thing is, again, dividing the 3 sectors. You could look at institutions of a very high scale, like the IITs and IIMs, as well as a few of the private institutions, who could actually, compete with foreign universities and colleges. But then there is a government regulation which is not letting us grow fast. So I think if you really have to do it, you'll have to give, survival of the fittest, or, growth of the fastest, or whatever. There has to be some sea change which happens, not in the next 1 or 2 years, but in the next few months itself.
No, I think your remarks are absolutely valid. There is no, I would almost say that's in violent agreement with some of the things which were said here. Now we need to make sure that we activate that, and therefore that supply and demand gap, where we did not spend too much of time, I think there a whole number of things need to be done in that space. You heard a lot of things about RUSA, the metrics, what are the dimensions of that. I think it's a very evolved piece of thinking. And you talk, and you got some indication of what flexibility could be. Those are the future things which need to be brought into our curriculum. Just a point of reference for you, in terms of US you referred to, it is also very heavily funded by the state. It's the overseas students who are not on scholarship who probably end up paying much more. So the segmentation of students is, which end up going there, that defines, anyways, that's a matter of detail. So I would really like to thank first all my colleagues on the dais. Thank you for your engagement, and thank you for being here. And I know now we are between you and a short break, so please do enjoy your break. Thank you very much.